Every day, more than 130 people die after overdosing on opioids. This abuse of opioids includes heroin, synthetic opioids, and prescription pain medication. So this is where we are, but how did we get here? The opioid crisis is an entanglement of a couple changes that occurred starting around the 80s, and it continues to affect us drastically. So during this time, there was a shift in the heroin market in regards to the U.S. So up until then, we had been receiving heroin from the east, and it would come through New York ports, and from there it would sort of make its way throughout the country. Now, compared to modern day heroin, this heroin was weak and diluted due to the distance traveled by the drug. And the 80s marked the point when Central and South American drug organizations began involving themselves in the heroin market. They had already become more sophisticated than before in recent years, and they started producing higher quality heroin, and it didn't have to travel as far, so it stayed potent. Within the decade, the Eastern market could no longer compete. It had been outsold. And we didn't notice this change until heroin had become a relevant issue. Now, as for the pharmaceutical industry, there were some major changes too that helped with the development of this issue. So our advancements in technology during this time were allowing us to develop new medications more efficiently than before. And opioid-derived painkillers were the next generation pain relievers for the industry. They were cheap and easy to make, manufacture, and best of all, they were non-addictive. Or at least that's what we believed. Prior to the development of these drugs, patients looking for pain relief would receive a drug-assisted treatment. So doctors would consider other methods to combat the patient's pain before prescribing drugs. After the development and introduction of these drugs, doctors would prescribe such medication as the first choice treatment. At first, a handful of doctors were hesitant, but eventually they began to follow the trend. Soon, very soon, after the shift in pain treatment occurred, insurance companies began changing their policies to accommodate with the times and, of course, increase profit. The opioid painkillers were so cheap and easy to make that the insurance companies began to only insure such treatment. They would only cover the cost of treatments through the prescription of opioids. And for convenience, doctors were pressured into giving larger prescriptions so that patients wouldn't have to refill as often. Remember, we still weren't aware of how addictive this opioid medication was. This gets looked over often, but patients were getting hooked and were unaware of it because their doctors told them that their medication wasn't addictive. And naturally, some patients would lose their prescription, in some cases because of their insurance, and other cases had other reasons. But whatever the cause, these people are addicted and without medication. Some of these people will turn to the streets to buy pills, but it wasn't too common yet for someone to jump from prescription medication to something like heroin. Even though heroin was cheaper than buying pills illegally, the addiction we know today hadn't yet made its appearance. It wasn't until the 90s, when OxyContin was introduced into the industry, that people began making the switch from prescription painkillers to heroin or synthetic opioids due to the desperate addiction that we recognize today. OxyContin was used for a variety of treatments and exploded in popularity in this new pharmaceutical environment. It quickly became a billion-dollar giant, making an appearance in every doctor's office, every clinic, and making addiction and drug abuse widely available. All of these events, in conjunction with social changes, have led us here, where over 130 people die every single day from their struggle with addiction and drug abuse.